Hello, everyone. This is Maria Teresa Barbis from SFAA. So excited to welcome you to our talk with Cecilia Sterner today. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you.
All the way from Malmö. And Cecilia actually went to SFAI as an international student from 1993 to 1994. And she was going to tell you a bit about her background later on, but I just wanted to let you all know that we met Cecilia when SFAA was in Stockholm for the supermarket art fair, and SFAA had a booth. It was our first booth at an art fair, and we brought artworks from like more than 10 alumni. Annie Reiniger was curating it, and Cecilia had this amazing, wonderful solo booth installation, one of the best artworks in the whole fair. And I did a little video for Instagram there, but I think I asked you already back then in Stockholm, would you please do this for us? And so we can share your work with our alumni community, because I thought it was an interesting concept also at SFAI that we had so many international students come in. It was also during my time, I met a lot of really interesting international students. So Cecilia, thank you so much for calling in all the way from Malmö today. And yeah, I'll hand it over to you now.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I studied at the Art Institute 30 years ago, so it feels a bit surreal to reconnect after all these years, actually. But thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the work you're doing with the legacy of the Art Institute and Spotlight. And yeah, so I'm Swedish and I'm based in Malmö, and that's a small city in the very south of Sweden. And it's just next to Copenhagen in Denmark. And like Maria said, we met at the art fair supermarkets in Stockholm this last spring, and I had been invited to show there by this curators collective, Flat Octopus, and then Maria invited me to Spotlight. So thanks again, Maria. So I will share my screen pretty much right away because I have a lot of pictures to show, and it will be a mix of different techniques, but I don't have much documentation from installation work during class at the Art Institute, so you will see examples of work shortly after and just throughout the years. So yeah, here we go. So do you see the whole screen now?
Perfect. It works great.
So yeah, I ended up, I will tell you the short story about how I ended up. It's very short, but I ended up in San Francisco pretty much by chance, actually, because there was no internet at the time. And it was kind of hard to look things up. And I went to an art school in Sweden and wanted to experience something else. And I also had personal reasons to get away. So I had this idea that I wanted to work with film and photography, but go more sculptural. And photography is a medium that has followed me throughout the years, but I usually don't show it. And I learned about San Francisco Art Institute and applied there. And San Francisco was, of course, a hotspot for anyone interested in experimental film. And it turned out that tuition was high and I didn't know anybody in San Francisco. So it was a bit of a gamble to see how long I would last in San Francisco. But I ended up working in the cave And that's kind of funny because I'm just building caves now, but this was the cave and the photo department at the Art Institute. And I found some really good friends and a cheap room in an apartment on Hayes and Webster. And yeah. And I really loved San Francisco, and I would explore it by taking the bus to and stop and just walk around, get off and just walk around and shoot pictures in semi-industrial areas with few or no people. And this is a photograph that's not from San Francisco, but it's kind of similar to what I used to do. And I also spent a lot of time at camera swaps and flea markets in Oakland and Berkeley. And that was pretty much my weekend fun the first semester. And I had some really great teachers. I had wonderful George Kishar and Jay Rosenblatt in filmmaking, and Hank Wessel, photography, and Al Wong in a class called Film Installations from $9 and up. And I think that's pretty much what I'm still doing. I mean, usually it costs more than $9, but I collect a lot of old stuff and just reuse material over and over again. And so, yeah, it was, I think that was the most important class during my years as a student overall, with Al Wong, actually, very important for me. So I went back to Sweden after a year, and during the summer, my father died. And after 10 years of severe illness, soon after my return, and I sort of lost the flow I had that first year. And for a long time, I was very confused about what I was doing and what my work was about. I still try to endorse confusion. It's a good starting point when you want to understand something. You might be willing to look at things from a different angle. So I was both into drawing and film installation at that time. And this was a drawing from an exhibition where I picked all the titles first, and they were all about different skills and personal qualities needed to get a simple job. I think I was kind of annoyed by this at the time. This was called Experience. And there were titles like stress tolerant, loyal, flexible, and meticulous. So now I'm going to show you a couple of early film works and then also give examples of work in different techniques before we move into more installation work. So this is an early film installation called The Eclipse from 1999. It was projected on a thin layer of fabric at a wooden loft. So this layer of textile was like a retina. And I used to project on smoke and layers of fabric, mirrors, and so forth in Al Wong's class. So we used to do a lot of experiments with this. And when I was 10 years old, a blind man came to our class and told us what it looked like when he turned blind. And he said, it was like pouring ink into a glass of water. And many years later, I came to think of his story as I was out walking in the very bright winter landscape. And I saw this as a metaphor of how people are incapable of meeting and seeing one another, mainly because they are busy with their own little universe. And so I built this thin glass tank and filmed the winter landscape and people through the glass as I poured black ink into the tank. So I like to dissolve the room, and I want the viewer to be a bit careful on where to place their next step. This might make you more hesitant and sharpen your senses. So it's a resolution of the room that I find exciting to work with, and it's about creating an uncertainty about what the viewer is looking at, moving between forgetting oneself and becoming aware of one's position, both in space and thoughts. So it can be more of a physical experience where you sort of forget that you're looking at art. And this was an installation I made the year after I came back from San Francisco. It was called King Size Intermezzo, and it was made in 1996. So a tiny exhibition space was turned into a hotel room, and there was a king-size bed, and an intermezzo had been taking place. So what would happen if you could physically enter a movie cliche, enter the film still into installation to witness the aftermath? Sorry about the blood here, but this was an image seen a million times before in the movies. So everything was still except a steel fan that made feathers from a torn pillow float around. And I think by using the unexpected to turn a very small white cube into a hotel room in a combination with something very familiar like a film cliche of a probable murder with several leads like blood, lipstick, emptied glasses, unhooked phone, traces of drama, that the audience had to make the investigation themselves and maybe even be challenged by their preconceived notions. So this and other installations I made at the time actually led to work as film production designer, which is one of the extra income I've had the last 20 years. I haven't done any film production work since 2018, but yeah, for 20 years I did. Wow. So one thing that has been consistent the last 30 years is my inconsistency when it comes to materials, because I love to explore just all kinds of materials. And here's a glass of water made of ice and slowly melting. So this is only a photograph. I'm still able of making a new one, but of course it disappears. And a common thread through my work is perception, how we perceive and read things in our environment and how our background colors what we see. So I was born in Sweden. I never had to be hungry unless it was self-inflicted. I went to public school, education and healthcare free in Sweden, and I grew up in the countryside with 3 older brothers, etc. So this makes me look at my surroundings from a certain perspective. But things can be turned upside down. And I also experienced a trauma in my family. I lost a brother. And although everyone in my family went through the same thing, we all perceived it in different ways. So when talking about what happened, we all have different stories. So our bad memory and personalities come into play. And I think that we can never get away from this, but that you can become aware of how you yourself and others react to different conditions. And so if you don't recognize yourself in your own family history, how does it look in general historiography? I use those experiences to try to make larger social events comprehensible. Layers of experience, background, and personality color the different interpretations we make. But we can also be drawn into collective movement towards better knowledge and accept lies in a self-destructive way, and digging into questions about personal motivations, conspiracies, power plays, prestige, altruism, and doing it both based on the place of the individual and the collective structure is sort of my interest. So, like I said before, I was very confused for a long time, and it's still very interesting to look back at work. this image I found for this talk, and it's I mean, you just realize that sometimes you're unconsciously aware of some things long before being able to verbalize it. And I made this mirror my first or second year at the Art Academy. So apparently I was working with perception much earlier than I thought. And before art school, I studied philosophy for a year. And in one of my books, they made a distinction between being alive and living a life. And the example was about the famous superstar chess player, Bobby Fischer. And he was obviously super smart, but also very paranoid. And he always suspected Russian players of trying to cheat him, and more generally, trusted no one. So I thought this was the weirdest example, but the text just stuck with me. And I made this mirror with the text and layers of color filters. And while reading the text, you slowly sort of became aware of your own reflection. So I think you just have to trust the process, even though you're not fully aware of what's going on and where you're heading. I mean, you have chosen to be an artist for a reason, and it's just another way to comprehend the world. So this was a video loop projected on this building in 2012, eternity. The concept of eternity is hard to grasp. How do we as humans react to different crises and events? What kind of future are we creating? People are always talking about different conspiracies, but in my opinion, if there is any conspiracy in the world, it's the brutal capitalism as we see it today. Some people will do everything to make obscene amounts of money with no intention to share, and then make people believe that the only morally wrong thing to do is try to prevent rich people from getting richer. And I think this is very contagious on all levels of society. And this installation was made with the help of the sun and a magnifying glass. So it's like an old game from your childhood, sort of. And so I burned the paper and I filmed the process. And in the end, the paper just burned totally out of control. I tried to do this over and over again because I really liked the result of the background from after the paper was gone, but it was impossible. And it's very often like that. You can never reconstruct what you just did. And so, yeah, I think the systems we're building and the political landscape have to be scrutinized and visualized. And I definitely think that the arts can help us understand ourselves, our weird habits and broken systems. But then art is, of course, also the freedom to use your fantasy, the need to make something with your hands, to build things, to visualize your weirdest ideas. And as a kid, I was always building stuff in the compost or using orange peel or whatever I could lay my hands on. And I remember digging a hole in the garden and turning that dirty mud hole into a motorboat. And I would write books, I would draw a lot, and I made a mountain out of shoe boxes in my room. And I just think this need to create is totally underrated. It is in Sweden for sure. And we must make sure all kids have access to this. And this is probably another talk, but I have worked a lot with kids in different projects and in the public, and that has been really important to me. So So I was invited to do an exhibition at a law firm, and I actually felt very dirty and full of stains as I entered this very beautiful place the first time. So with the dress code as a starting point, memory, doubt, and the human factor were the theme, and something lawyers and artists could have in common. And during the exhibition, the staff could have a portrait made by me, and in exchange, they would give me a garment that meant something to them and take me out for a drink and talk about themselves. So this article of clothing, it could be altered and made into a portrait, and it would then be given back to them to wear or to frame. They could choose. And then the only rule was they could not comment on the work. They had to accept my impression and interpretation of them. So this example here was not actually a portrait because I don't have the portraits anymore since I gave them away. And so this was one of the shirts hanging on the wall. Okay. So let's start talking about caves. Blast from the Past is a series of experimental installations that explore memory loss, coexistence, and what to bring into the future. They are large scale and built with paper, tape, video, various found materials, and they are site adjusted. And they can include performance and be caves to enter, or a cave wall made with paper with cavities to look into. And this is the first cave I built. It was an experimental project that evolved during installation as a symbolic setting for our loss of memory and the challenges to face and overcome for mankind. And stalagmites and stalactites were the backdrop for this video and still projection, and the sound loop was elaborated on site. And the stalagmites and the stalactites had a conversation on memory loss, freely based and distorted from Spellbound by Hitchcock. So it was also a meeting place for two creatures examining the cave with flashlights. And the caves have been inhabited by creatures who, in accordance with traditional mythology, challenge the visitor in various ways. And passing through the cave means an altered state. So if you find your way out easily, it means that you will overcome difficulties. And if you're lost or struggling, you need to be prepared for more challenges ahead. So let's see, this is a film documentation of this. Let's hope the sound works. It's 1 minute and 50 seconds.
Memory only touched the part of your mind that feels. It's like looking into a mirror and seeing nothing but the mirror. Do you remember? No.
yeah. So like I said, I've done several of these, and this is from window shopped in an empty store downtown in Malmö, and I was invited by the city of Malmö to make this one. And here you could not enter, only see it from the outside, and it was on for 4 weeks. So I had to, this was not like live performance. And this little creature here was prepared with an engine to shake just a little every now and then, just to make sure nobody would be sure it wasn't alive, sort of. And this time I made video works about coexistence, and this was one example of this paw and this girl. And I very often use this clash between something ugly, dark, raw, and sophisticated, and ludicrous and funny at the same time. So I like this clash, and when it all comes together. This is just like a short clip of this. So you would see it from the outside, and sometimes you would just look in and in the cavities, but you could never be sure if it was a projection or a mirror in the screen or just a black hole. And then I was invited to do this at a performance studio here in Malmö. It's called Lilith Performance Studio, and the work, the title of the work is Jamais Vu. That was a performance and an installation in form of a big rock. And this was also populated with creatures from different times who, through a simple game, related to each other. And as a spectator, you could only see fragments of the hole inside the cave as you peek into its cavities. So you never got the whole picture. And jamais vu is the term for a psychological condition that gives an eerie feeling of being part of something for the first time, even though one rationally knows that it has been experienced before. So it's sort of the opposite of déjà vu and a temporary disconnection between our perception and memory. And jamais vu may be the result of temporal lobe dysfunction due to fatigue, stress, sleep deprivation, or neurological conditions, damages, and drugs. And yeah, is the sound still okay, Maria? Okay.
Sound is great.
Good. This is just a minute. And this was, I really like this because here I had professional performers. I usually force my kids to wear the costumes and my friends and myself. Yeah, so another window exhibition in Gothenburg in Sweden. And this one you could not enter, but only see from the outside. And again, it was possible to peek into its cavities and I used some new objects like this root with the yellow fabric. This is an object I've used, I made just by itself, called Diluted Theories, and also Break a Leg, the one at the bottom that you saw before, a twisted branch. This was an exhibition an old boiler room in Gothenburg. So the visitors encounters inhabitants of unclear descent. It's a really dirty and moldy boiler room underground, where 3 inhabitants are some kind of engineers, or a cave if you want, with its own ongoing universe. And they scrutinized the interior and seemed to want to direct the light into the dark parts of the room. And also had these light installations on the wall with objects, just glass objects and pin spots. And I hang the glass objects in the small engines for miracles. So they spin, constantly spin. Okay, this is called The Real World. And it was actually an inauguration of this art hall. This trailer was an art hall that people to the left runs this. And they invited me to do their first exhibition. And this work was shown just around the Swedish election. So I made this, here, sorcery meets campaign work. And so this was an investigation of the visitors' grounding in reality. And everyone who answered a survey received a pin and candy. And the survey was vaguely based on what was going on in this community, but basically made no sense. Like most surveys, you have to answer. And inside this caravan was a cave with a creature cooking candy, and that was me in a costume. And the name of the campaign was Make the World Real Again, and could be read on the candy pin and cap. So to make the world real is, of course, a joke. The world is real. It's just that life is stranger than fiction sometimes. So it's more referring to our feelings. And I will again show a 1-minute film.
Gå på känsla och det ni tror, så kommer det bli bra.
Ska vi visa i något av dem?
Ja, precis.
Vi lämnar det sen.
Sen kan ni lämna det till mig. Ja, tack så mycket.
Hej! Har du kollat på utställningen här? Nej. Men jag tycker verkligen du borde göra det. Och sen så undrar vi om du skulle vilja svara på den här snabba enkäten. Det är lite svårt när du har en korv i tassen.
Ja, det är det.
Om du vill.
Hemma efteråt.
Ja.
Så får man en sån här brosch och får man en liten karamell. Bra som efterrätt ju, till korven.
Men vad går det ut på? Varför?
Ja, men det är just det, att det är helt tolkningsfritt det här. Det finns inget rätt eller fel. Så det är upp till dig vad du
Vad går det ut på?
Det är en del av själva konstverket.
Okay. Yeah, so that was, I must say that I really enjoy making these things during these kind of circumstances, to work in the public and amongst other events, people eating hot dogs and taking part in lotteries and just passing by. And just in general, people are really curious, and you don't have to address any certain kind of group. You have kids, the usual crowd, and seniors in a good mix, and I really enjoy it. So yeah, you've seen this. This was actually made as a proposal for a public commission. So I made this as the Milky Way, and because it was for a corridor at the hospital just outside the milk room for little babies. But I didn't win the commission. but I have used this many times, like you saw before in the boiler room. I love exploring these simple glass objects and just lights. So that's just an example of, you know, a sketch for a public commission. And I also did another public commission for the Center for Forensic Psychiatry. This was in 2016. And this was made to create a larger context, like contact with seasons and the region. And the theme is the birds that move in the area. They are stretching past the panoramic window on the annual migration. And there is also rich bird life in the area opposite of the panorama and in the green courtyards. So I made these glass walls with colored filters and printed ink paintings. So I did paintings of different trees in the areas. And also this lamp that was programmed to follow the European pied flycatcher to subtropical Africa. So the light was therefore stronger in the wintertime. And that's really needed in Sweden. So it was kind of nice to have this strong lights in the winter. And then I made some bronze bird houses with recorded bird calls of 3 different birds, which you could hear when they were in the area, but just very briefly. And I made chairs as bird nests and so on. And they could check out binoculars and bird books and things like that. And this is the portal. I was invited by the Roskilde Festival in 2012. That's a big music and arts festival in Denmark, similar to Coachella, big, but not that big. I mean, probably 1/10 or something. And the assignment was to make a light portal to one of the areas. And they usually have a focus on issues where they want to donate some of the profit. And that year they had a migration theme. So I built this portal with 7 light boxes where 7 persons would sleep during the festival. So I turned them into objects and numbers. And I did this with collaboration with an asylum group from Sweden who were willing to live there and also wanted to promote their work in the daytime. Yeah. I think I'm done, Maria. Maybe that was too fast.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecilia. I'm gonna add myself to the spotlight again, and maybe you pause the sharing for a minute so we can actually go over questions, and we have plenty of time for the Q&A now. I know you were kind of worried, you were rushing through, but
yeah,
it was really
maybe I was rushing too much.
It was great. I think it was great. We all got a great overview over your practice. And so anyone in the audience, if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and I will ask Cecilia whatever you would like to know. I'm gonna, do you want to stop the sharing for now?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, okay. So I have a couple of things that went through my mind, and and also because I saw the installation in person, right? It gives me kind of, and I even got a hat, and I never knew who the hat was for, and now I know it was the real Make the World Real Again. I actually have that hat.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
I gave it to you.
And that was really cool. And when I was there, it was just like something about the texture of that paper that you created the cave with. And also the you know, you called it like the simplicity of the material, like when the cups were turning and the light was just spectacular. It was, but especially the paper. I wanted just to ask you a little bit, like, when did you start working with paper like that, like really create these spaces, and how difficult is it to kind of like make that paper stand and do what you want it to do? And then we're gonna have another question by Eve Werner after that one.
But yeah, it's really easy actually, but and it's a wonderful material. I recommend it to everyone to experiment. This is the kind of paper you put on the floor when you do paint jobs. So it's like the cheapest kind of the brown paper, but it's kind of thick still. And so what I do, I just roll it out and lay them side by side, maybe 3 of them, and tape them together on the back. And then I just, you know, make a big ball like that. And then I take the paper out, and so it's all wrinkled. And then you can just do whatever you want, sort of. It's interesting because it just becomes, you know, it's a rock, you know, when it's magic actually. And so I didn't plan to do this. Of course, the first installation was, I was just experimenting, and I wanted to buy a material, but that was really expensive. So it's called alu shape with the aluminium in canvas sort of, and that was not possible to work with. So I just, you know, came up with this idea, maybe this kind of paper would work. And you can actually keep the paper, you know, you can tear it down and use it again, and it's just the best material. So what I do is I just build this structure with wood, just a very simple structure, and I just tape it, or what do you say, tack it with so it's also pretty fast to work with. Actually,
it was incredible, and especially at the art fair also, like everyone who's been to an art fair, the noise level after like a couple of days, you know, they just really get to you. And so Cecilia's cave was also so wonderful place to hang out because it was really sheltering you from all the noise. And it was really incredible how insulated the cave was, right? You were really feeling like you were removed from the fair, you know, you were just in your own little sacred space. It was really, really beautiful. All right, I have one question. Keep the questions coming. Eve Werner, the concept of jamais vu is very interesting. I'm curious how you encountered this concept and what attracted you to it. I've never heard about it either. Jamais vu. I heard déjà vu, obviously, but jamais vu, I've never heard.
I can't remember how I first encountered it, but I think I was reading about déjà vu and just bumped into this jamais vu, and it's actually something they've done a lot of studies on. It's like you can, if you repeat one word a lot of many times, maybe 70 times or something like that, you will start to question the word. And I think it's just I was just very intrigued by it myself. I don't know much about it. There is not that much to read, but I thought that was interesting. And so it's just the term I used for this installation, because it's sort of you're not, it's really hard to be aware of if you've been there before. I mean, or if it's just, I mean, sometimes you also get so confused. You know you've probably been somewhere, but you can't sort of collect the memories. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm really vague, but it was just something I wanted to explore, and I might do some more of that actually, because very often you just start with a project and maybe you don't have time to do thorough research and do it over and over again. So yeah, I might pick it up later.
I have one more question also about the characters that are living in the spaces you create, right? Especially since I'm from Austria, I have to ask about the horned moss person, right? Like the kind of like moss is that like we have it in Florida too, like it hangs off it's this incredible texture again, right? It hangs off the trees here, and then the horns kind of go out like that. Can you tell us a little bit about that person?
I want them to look a little bit weird, but also ridiculous, and because they are very scary. You might not believe this, but they can't do much in the cave. But when people enter the cave and they see these two creatures, I'm talking about grown-ups now. They do get very scared. And also at supermarkets, people would leave right away when they saw me, and I was just standing there. It's scary, and so they have to be occupied with the simple things like flashing torchlights and things like that. So not challenge visitors too much, but like I said, in mythology, caves are filled with gods and creatures that will challenge you. So in mythology, it's worse, but you can't really do it with an art audience. I mean, there was a child who was in the cave at the supermarket, and she came back maybe 6 or 7 times. She must have had a parent who was exhibiting, and she would just come back over and over again. And finally, she asked if she could hug me. That's very unusual, but yeah. So she became my friend.
Oh,
That
wow.
was
All right, we have a question again about the creatures from Mary Rowe. I really enjoy your creature costumes. What materials did you use? Is there a particular myth that inspired you?
Yeah, it's not a particular one. It's I think there are many of them. It's just so again, it's used like a projection for challenges ahead of us, and so this is just I guess a playful way to deal with that. I mean, now when I'm talking about the work, it's it sounds very political, and it is political, but it's also I want to play with these different elements. So I also want people to laugh about it. Be scared. We can laugh and enjoy in different ways, but I just want this mix of all feelings. So.
Yeah.
And the material is just also, again, it's just a combination of different things. So I have the costumes are made with like hunting costumes. What they look like. They come in beige and green, and they can also be white if you're hunting in the winter landscape. And then I've used just different materials to add, and foam and branches and different things just to make them look funny, sort of.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Then we have a question from you, Jenny. Your work evokes a strong connection to the subconscious mind. How much of that is thoroughly thought through before you begin a piece of work? Basically, how much of that is spontaneous versus intentional? Thank you, Cecilia.
That's a good question. It's not really thought through. It's I usually just I have an idea. I just see an image, sort of. That's how my work starts, and I have no idea what it's all about most of the time. And then I just work things through, and very often when I show it, I still don't have any idea. I mean, I feel sometimes very stupid, but it's just the way I work. And after all these years, I know I just have to trust my intuition. If it's a strong image and I want to work with it, I know that I will finally understand it somehow. And so it's I would say it's very unconscious. And looking back at my work, it's really strange that I could not see from the very beginning that everything is about perception and how we perceive things differently. But yeah, guess I'm kind of slow or something. But pieces. Now I have the pieces, so I can see sort of the common thread, but took a long time.
I feel like that's also why else make art if you already understand everything you're doing, right? So I feel like that's kind of like the puzzle that we're slowly but surely figuring out over time. I think it's really, really interesting. And one of the pieces that also stuck with me, because I have this psychology background, like there's like this, if you study psychology, you study, so much of your studies is about perception, right? And how we perceive the world and what is actually there and what is just us making it up, so I thought it was really, really interesting, the piece that you did with the ink, where you were covering the image over time more and more and more, right? And I feel like it's just like such a beautiful metaphor also about how we can learn how to better understand each other, because we all have our ink spots, right, on how we look at the world. And so I feel like that there's the way that you are showing that to people is very kind, right, and very like experimental, but it's also I think it's also like what you said, this mirroring, right? You're mirroring the human experience in a sense. So yeah, thank you for that. I did want to ask one more question, since no one else is everyone is very quiet. I get to talk more. There was this incredible piece you did for this not Coachella but smaller music festival, right? With the refugees in the boxes, right? Can you talk a little bit more how you were able to make that happen? And then that is probably going to be our last question for today.
Yeah, how I made that happen. This was a long time ago, so I just wanted to work with the theme that I had and not just make a light installation. So I wanted just to make something more thought-provoking, and I just came up with this idea to sort of turn them into objects instead. And building it was probably the worst experience I've ever had in the public, because there was this heavy rainfall for a week, and I was just out with the carpenter building this, and everything turned into mud. But that was also kind of good, I think, for the installation not to be too pretty in this surrounding. And yeah, it was also interesting to work with this group of people and sort of let go of, not be in control of your own work. So this was like collaboration. I had this idea, and then they wanted to sleep in this, and then it was up to them to do whatever in the daytime. So they did their work and were talking to people about these issues in the daytime, and I was not there anymore. So sort of just left it to them. And then
Wow.
back to deinstall sort of. And it's well, it's very often like that. You can never be in control of what people would think and how they will perceive your work, and so it's part of it.
Mhm. We have one last question by Catherine. Thanks, Catherine. What was the influence of George Kuchar on your work? I studied with him and was in his films in the 1980s. How do you feel about SFAI's influence on you now? It's such a good question, Catherine. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, he was just such a sweet and wonderful person, and I think that's a very good influence, just right there. And also very experimental, and he was not a control freak. He would just let all the students work together. So we had to figure out ourselves who would write the script, who would do production design, and who would play the main character. And so you just spent the whole semester just making a film. And by the end of the semester, it was screened and everyone was there, and it was a big party, sort of. And yeah, you just learn so much from being. You don't need a lot of money to do this. It was, and back then everything was analog, so it was all 16mm film, and you just had to put some grease on the lens to do things like that to make it distorted. And he would just let us do anything. And I also think that's how he did his own films. They are so really, charming, great, creative work. And he just starts digging where he's at, sort of. And yeah, he just made the greatest movies, I think. I'm so glad I met him, actually.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got the chance to meet him.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecilia. This was really, really great. And thanks everyone for joining. This was another wonderful Spotlight talk. And I'm going to stop the recording now so you can all say goodbye.